G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day and so far a brilliant start to your week. Now legends, I think this may be my last video for at least a couple of days. Not only am I on my third day of chemotherapy, but my immune system, it's highly vulnerable and I've picked up a cold. Now it's not that bad, but mixed with everything else, I just feel really under the weather. Of course, my immune system, my white blood cell counts, these aren't great. And I've been very lucky to stay away from anything like this for the last 11 months, but it's always going to come right near the end. So thank you, legends, for all of your support. And I know you'll be back once I am back as well. So legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to talk about today. Of course, we'll look at the maps. We will compare maps. We'll see where some maps are just showing absolute opposites of what is occurring and try and find some level of consensus, especially around that Pokrovsk area. Then we're going to do what I'm dubbing Tomahawk. We're going to talk about Tomahawk missiles, see the intelligence that the US is sending into Ukraine about these long-range strikes, which has surprised people. But if you're surprised by US intelligence helping with long-range strikes at this point in time, I don't know where you've been. But also about Tomahawks. Will we see them? Will we not see them? And is the real use of the Tomahawk, the threat of sending Tomahawks in, is that actually more valuable as a tool to Trump than actually having Tomahawks firing in? We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about everyone's favourite person, of course, Mr. Boris Johnson. And of course, he's been taking, well, it seems like maybe a little bit off the top, with £1 million being paid to him. Was it a political donation? Was it a private donation? Well, we'll look at what The Guardian has exposed through some files today, and we're going to relate that to how many people, the very few, get massively rich off massive suffering during war. We'll talk about how war can be a racket. We'll go through General Smedley D. Butler's book following the First World War. But let's start here. And what we have seen is Trump seemingly walking back on his pretty vicious tweets towards China and Xi Jinping over the weekend. Don't worry about China. It will all be fine. Highly respected President Xi had a bad moment. He doesn't want depression for his country, and neither do I. The USA wants to help China, not hurt it. From President Donald J. Trump. Now, is this Trump having a realization of the actual impact that these tariffs would have, sanctions would have, of course, tariffing China, but also China not then sending rare earths out anywhere? We know 90% of the rare earths then come from China, or the refinement at least. Or is it pure market manipulation to have that dip in the market, money go in? We did see apparently a lot of shorting of the market right before this happened. People will be selling out. Trump says openly that all these countries are conspiring against him. But we see the actions too, what is said and what's coming out of. I think there's this realization of the US power isn't what it was in the 90s, or at least the dominance. So in my mind, this is more a realization of, holy shit, there's a massive stranglehold on so many of these critical items. But will we see China back down? Well, wait and see. Okay, so let's have a look on the maps. And of course, here you have Ukraine, the centre of screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupies since 22, the purple since 2014. Of course, any red check you see is Russian ground made, blue check, Ukrainian ground made. Now we have 2 days worth of maps to go over. We're going to talk about today first, and we'll work backwards a little bit. The only changes on the map today is we see a lot of blue check around Vilny and Khushchev Yar, Novoshakovka, as well just a little bit to the north of Poltavka. Now, interestingly, some of this is actually turning into ground that wasn't actually held. It was then grey, but we see this movement in here. You can see we'll go back, forward. Now, of course, there's areas that the red has likely somewhat expanded, but that's not being shown in red check. It just shows some of the biases in this map. But this map, still showing these cutoffs in here, this is showing the opposite situation to what the other mappers are saying. And what I will say, the other mappers that I typically go off, being AMK and Suryak, yes, there may be biases, yes, they may be incorrect in some times, but as far as reliability, I've found them significantly more reliable than Deep State, as well as we went through what Thorkill spoke about yesterday, who in my opinion has been the best mapper or blogger about this whole area in here. So firstly, let's look at what Suryak has said, and then look at what AMK is saying. Now, Suryak, he's showing all the way from Shakovka, Volodymyrivka, that this area through to Popov Yar is all coming under control, as well as we have Zhytomyr, Nikhorovka. Last few days, there are army remaining troops in the area on the outskirts of Boykivka, and the Russian DRG's operations have extended north of Kushetiv Yar. So north of Kushetiv Yar, that's where Russian DRGs are pushing. Nikhorovka, Novoshakovka, that these areas down in here, more of this is coming under Russian control by this map. And as you can see, this is showing almost the opposite. Well, it is compared to what Deep State is showing. AMK, he shows this. From Zatishok to Nikhorovka, from Zatishok to Nikhorovka, exactly what Suryak is saying, and Pankivka to Shakovka, Poltavka, Popovya, all this area filling in. Very similar to what Suryak has been saying, similar as well to what Thorkill is saying. AMK, he also posted, but don't worry, most pro-Ukrainian maps still have thousands of desperate Russian soldiers encircled in 3 massive pockets in this direction, and we still see that narrative being upheld that there's thousands and thousands of soldiers cut off in Kushetiv Yar, cut off between Kushetiv Yar and Zatishok. There's 8 encirclements I know that David's on about, and the reality is it most likely probably looks like this from the limited geolocations we have, from the multiple sources of maps who sit more in that neutral setting. Again, highly, highly difficult to get an idea in here, but again, when I go off the reputations of these maps, these tend to be the most accurate ones. Now, we will see just down in the south of this map here, we'll see near Minograd some ground being made. This is then reflected across Suryak's map, just somewhat in a different location on the maps as the screenshot is different, but you get the idea that down just in this sector, in, of course, what we call Pokrovsk actual, just some change in there. No real changes shown on this map except for there today. So then we come to yesterday's map, and we do have some areas to look at. Now, the next place we're going to go is up into the north. We'll actually work, my labeling is wrong, but we'll work from Sumy all the way down. So we have, of course, Sumy, Oleksivka, Varashne, Novomaylivka, areas you should be familiar with by now, but you're going to need to be familiar with just for a second. We have this. Ukraine making a little bit of ground in the direction of Oleksivka, Varashne, Novomaylivka, that these areas in here where Russia has expanded some control as well. Again, Suryak, he has spoken about this actually over a couple of days. I do know AMK did miss a day of map updates in there. Okay. So let's move our way. The next area is going to be Kupiansk. Now, Kupiansk, this is very interesting. Ignore this red check for now. Between the 11th and 12th, what we saw was a large increase in grey zone, with the majority of Kupiansk, the vast majority, coming under grey zone. When I say the vast majority, I mean the majority on the western side in here. There's still a massive amount on this eastern side, but of course split by the Oskil. You and I have spoken for months about the issues that the Oskil raises, the ability for this to be actually cut off in here. The heavy equipment is going to be very challenging to get back across, and the Deep State map putting this into grey zone. I know a lot of people talk about grey zone in this map where you can just reflect that as red across other maps. It's not as simple as that, but you get the point. Now, let's talk about this area in just Pishani right here, where this red check is showing Russian control from yesterday. Again, this is reflected fairly similar across the AMK's map in this direction, just to the north of Pishani. So yes, we'll confirm that there was definite movement there. And then we'll move our way down a little bit. We have then the Terny pocket, Borova pocket. Now, I forgot yesterday, I didn't shrink myself when I spoke about the length of logistics into here. So if you're saying you're coming from Izium and you need to get right up into Zarazhove right here, Izium down into here somewhere, track your way up, you're talking like 60 Ks to get around the Oskil. And this is why this whole pocket is so challenging. Zarazhove up in here, Suryak did speak about some changes the other day. AMK, he's showing similar changes today, so we can confirm Russia is pushing down in the south in here, or most likely pushing down the south, and I'm not surprised to see this at all. Now, move our way down, and we have 2 front lines to speak about in here. We have really the Liman area, Siversk, as well as Stavke, just to get an idea of where we're actually sitting. So firstly, let's talk about a Stavke area just to line ourselves up. And this should be this one right here. So you can see Stavke, Liman, and of course the Russians, they're not at Stavka yet, but they're basically in line with it to the west of Dobrasheve. So we have out into about this direction in here. We can see lining up, reaching this main sort of ring road coming in here according to AMK mapping, as well as in the direction from Zadashne to Liman as well. So Liman, Zadashne, it's just cut off in his map, but pushing out in here, of course, having a lot of then further envelopment of some areas back in around Ternay, Bilhorivkia area. See where Yampalivka is sitting just in here. So keep an eye. This sector has really been collapsing for some time. It's gone from the western push to a southern push. And as I've said, I'm not surprised to see this, because all the Russians need to do for war of attrition is gain ground in Karpivka. So this creates this pocket in here, and then shift focus south towards Stavka, towards Liman, what then has further encirclement or envelopment of Liman through to Soviansk and Siversk. You can see a little bit of ground red made in the direction of Yampil here. Keep an eye on that for a second. I'll bring up the AMK map. This is Yampil down in here, and him showing that there is control through Yampil. So this is through Yampil itself. You can see where these roads are lining up, as well as see where this road then dog legs out to the west. Let's have a look. So this is the direction right out in here. You can see it crosses some of these fire lines out in this direction. So further than the grey zone out, AMK is suggesting that this ground is moving in that direction, and Yampil, the majority, is coming under control. It's not the easiest thing to line up in the world, but probably down into about this sector right here. So beyond this grey zone by a kilometre or so, that's what he's suggesting has come under Russian control. Now, we have just the Velika Novosilka front line to look at. We can see just a little bit of ground being made around Malinivka, of course, to the south of Poltavka. We do know there's been a lot more pushing in this direction. That was on yesterday's map. Let's come up to today's map. We'll move our way all the way up. We see grey around Filia, and we do have in the north today AMK saying Filia is coming under control of the Russian forces. Okay, now let's move our way down, and of course we've spoken a lot about this Olesivka, Verbove, Sosnivska front line, where there has been both Ukrainian and Russian successes, but the net success has been on the Russian side. We see, according to AMK, Russians are pushed into Oleksivka and around Seshnay and Novoselivska as well, just to the northeast of Sosnivska. So Novoselivska, this direction in here. We believe Sosnivska is likely back under control of the Ukrainian forces, shown by these maps here. Not deep state. Suryak here showing this same break-in into Oleksivka that AMK is. We'll move our way down. Of course, we're looking for Poltavka. This is shown mostly in grey. Suryak is showing there's some advancements in this direction, further break-in into Poltavka. This is more on the Huliapol front line. We've spoken about the challenges that this front line does have due to the only military victory plan that we really had of a military sense, not relying on a Russian collapse, although push in the south. And with this sweeping across the Zaporizhia becomes more and more unlikely. But the problem is the main fortifications in here, from Huliapol to Otokiv all the way to Zap, to protect against a northern attack, and that these not only are coming from the east, going west, but they're also getting in behind a lot of these fortifications. Keep an eye on here. If anywhere is going to have manoeuvre re-entered, it is in this direction, but not at this point in time. And I believe that is all the maps that I have for you. If I've missed something, I apologise. Now, let's talk about Tomahawks, or the Toma Talk. Now, this is from the Financial Times today. Ukraine hit Russian energy sites with US help. For months, the US has been helping Ukraine mount long-range attacks, coordinated effort to weaken Putin's economy and force him to the negotiating table. American intelligence shared with Kyiv has enabled strikes on important Russian energy assets, including oil refineries, something Joe Biden's administration had discouraged. Kyiv's strikes have driven up energy prices in Russia and prompted Moscow to cut diesel. Trump has deepened his support for Ukraine as his frustration with Russia has grown. I don't think Trump has increased his support for Ukraine at all. Again, who's cutting money? It's all just purchased from Europe, of course, the money going in. I think Trump has a massive want to weaken Russia more so than enable the strengthening of Ukraine. Remember, that is different. It's like all the NATO accounts. I think they are significantly more anti-Russian than they are pro-Ukrainian, just because they want more death, more destruction, even if the campaign at this point in time and military operations are going to be Pyrrhic, but that's a talk for another time. Trump signals he's backing for a strategy to make them feel the pain. Now, another few paragraphs down, the US intelligence helps Kyiv shape route planning, altitude, timing, and mission decisions, enabling Ukraine's long-range one-way attack drones to evade air defences. 3 people familiar with the operation said Washington was closely involved in all stages of planning. The US official said Ukraine selected the targets for long-range strikes, and Washington then provided intelligence on the sites of vulnerabilities. But others involved and briefed on the operation said the US has set out target priorities for the Ukrainians. One of them described Kyiv's drone force as the instrument for Washington to undermine Russia's economy and push Putin towards a settlement. Now, what I'll say is it's far more likely this second option here. The US, they have significantly more involved than a lot of people would like to realise, or actually people will know, but they won't say. As far as selecting targets, if it's GPS, if it's satellite, it's all this, it's coming from the US and this idea here, that they are wanting to undermine Russia's economy to push Putin towards a settlement. And exactly that article back in the day of extending Russia, how you would do this, and the extension, it's ringing all the bells there, and how Washington wants to weaken Russia more so than strengthen Ukraine, okay? And that is not synonymous. You can do both, but you can also do one more than the other. And I think the US is more focused on weakening Russia than they are strengthening Ukraine. Now, of course, Russia is responding to this. 60% of Ukraine's natural gas production has reportedly been destroyed in the past weeks. And this tit-for-tat long-range strikes, this will continue. And I don't see the net benefit for either country to actually stop this at the moment, or to try and have some sort of deal to stop this. Now, my take is not only does Moscow have more drones and more missiles to fire into Ukraine, but Russia is significantly larger than Ukraine, and they've got a lot more industry that needs to be hit to be taken out at a lot greater range than Ukraine. What we know is Russia can hit these industry areas they've got more drones, more weapons on a smaller country of Ukraine. They can target this, where Russia is a massive country with a massive industrial capacity, and the amount of missiles and drones you're going to need to actually take that out is massive too. So who's going to have more success in this? Ultimately, most likely, just by the numbers, it's going to be Russia. Although the centre of gravity of funding for Russia's war effort is in Moscow, the centre of gravity for Ukraine's war effort is in Brussels and Washington, and that plays a big role. Trump says he might send Ukraine long-range Tomahawk missiles if Russia continues conflict. Just some quotes here. I might say, look, if this war is not going to be settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, very offensive weapon, and honestly, Russia does not need that. It's a big, beautiful weapon. Trump said, I might tell them that the war is not settled, then we may as well. But we may not. We may not do it. I think that's appropriate to bring up. Do they want to have Tomahawks going in that direction? I don't think so. I think I might speak to Russia about that. Tomahawks are a new step of aggression. And the posturing around Tomahawks, in my opinion, is just getting fucking old. Putin is not going to settle this war on the threat of Tomahawks that the West expects him to. They're just on the threat of Tomahawks that is not going to roll over Kyiv and, yep, okay, we're pulling back to here, NATO's in, all of that. It's just not going to happen. All this Tomahawk feels more like biding time to find a way to not send them to Ukraine and just using it as a threat. And I think Trump knows this. I think Trump knows the threat of Tomahawks is likely a larger impact than if they are sent in the limited numbers, particularly if they've got some level of restriction. The problem with escalation is once that you've escalated to that point, you need something else to escalate to again. So once the Tomahawks are sent in, they'll have initially a large impact, then it will taper off as any system does, any Russian, any Western, any system does. What then is the next escalatory point if it doesn't have Putin rolling over and saying that we stick our hands up and we settle? I think this is more being used for saber rattling and posturing. Will we see it get to the level where they are sent in? I think it's likely, but again, there's no such thing as wonder waffles. If long-range missiles like this were going to be that, look at Russia's overwhelming long-range capability compared, and it hasn't done what you're expecting of these weapon systems. Especially, we do not know the numbers that could go in. The Guardian had this article today for everyone's favourite man, of course, Boris Johnson, the £1 million man. Why Boris Johnson take his donor to Ukraine? As he boarded a night train to Ukraine, Johnson had the usual entourage of aides and bodyguards, plus the man who had given him £1 million. The largest donation ever to an individual MP was from Christopher Harbin. Harbin was registered as advisor to the office of Boris Johnson when they went to Kiev. Harbin has wide expertise, self-described digital nomad. His holdings range from crypto and a wellness centre to jet fuel and stakes in at least 3 military contractors. His only apparent connection to Ukraine is as the biggest shareholder in British weapons manufacturer whose robots and drones are reportedly supplied to its armed forces. The Boris files, leaked documents from Johnson's private office, have exposed how the former PM has sought to enrich himself since leaving office by sitting down with the Venezuelan deposit and courting Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, accused of murdering a journalist. The Ukrainian cause, by contrast, is sacred, Johnson, one political consultant says. The leaked files raise questions about whether, even here, he has blurred the lines between public service and money making. And what I'll say is, in wartime, there is no line between service, public service, and money making. Look at where a lot of these then ex-MPs or ex-colonels have gone. We have a big problem with this in like the Australian forces of these guys becoming warrant officer class 1s, colonels, brigadiers, whatever. They put everything in line for when they leave the forces of, next thing, we want these vehicles to enter, so I'm writing all this doctrine. We leave, they go work for Mercedes-Benz, and these vehicles come in. Great example of this is why the fuck does the Australian Army operate G-Wagons? They absolutely suck for having body armour, for fixing them on the fly, whatever. Half the boys drive Land Cruisers or Toyota Hiluxes anyway. I can tell you there's some interesting money behind the scenes, and trust me, that goes all the way to the top and the bottom. Corruption in Western militaries is just better hidden, but it's there. An extraordinary statement to The Guardian when asked about this relationship with Harbin, Johnson said, "Your pathetic non-stories seem mostly to be derived from some illegal Russian hack job. You should be ashamed of yourselves. The distributed denial of secrets US-based transparency group that obtained the leaked files said it did not know their provenance." Johnson added, "Why don't you just change your name to Pravda? Your stories are rubbish and you are doing Putin's work." Now, what I will say is if you scuff your knee in Europe, it is suddenly Putin's fault. And this is a big problem because any questions raised, any criticisms anywhere, whether you're asking about democratic principles in Europe, you're asking about £1 million going to the former prime minister, instantly it's a Russian hack job, you're doing Putin's work when there's legitimate questions being raised. And that is like calling someone a sexist or a racist. It just discredits everything and you can't continue. It is a shoddy job and it's fucking disgusting from this blonde-haired fuckwit. Chris and Boris only. I know Boris is loved now. I think in the future in Ukraine he's going to be hated. In Downing Street, Johnson rallied Western powers as Vladimir Putin's armies poured into Ukraine in 22. Since resigning, has continued to travel there, pledging to maintain allies' commitment and remains popular and cheered in the streets. I think time will change this. When he came on the 8th of September, he went for a quick shower, went to his hotel at the Yalta European Strategy Yes Forum. An itinerary in the leaked files indicates, according to publishers and participants, Ukrainian ministry, spy masters, military chiefs, mingled with foreign diplomats, politicians, industrialists and executives. The itinerary has Boris and Chris only down to attend an opening session of the high-level gathering. Images show Zelensky and Johnson addressed the gathering luminaries, and itinerary suggests they retired for a private meeting. Zelensky's office did not respond when asked if Johnson's benefactor joined them. So did this bloody rich bloke who has his fingers in all these pies, did join them? No one knows. While Johnson was still an MP when he set up the private company, the Office of Boris Johnson Limited, the financial advisor reveals that he was expecting a payment to the fund the company's first few days. The payment does not appear on the Electoral Commission's donation database, suggesting it may have been a contribution towards Johnson's money-making activities. So was it a political donation or was it to Boris Johnson Limited? And this is the problem, is while you're in power, you're an MP, you set up this, you can get donations, you get all this, you can set things in motion. Oh, look at this, straight away we're off flying into business. It is fucking disgraceful. The month of the £1 million payment, Johnson and Harbin dined together twice in Singapore. January 23, entry to Johnson's schedule, set aside half an hour to call with his backer. It was labelled Ukraine Readout. That September, by which Johnson had quit Parliament and he and Harbin stepped aboard a private jet. Leaked files indicate the private jet, apparently operated by Harbin, carried them to eastern Poland to catch a sleeper to Kyiv. Harbin's lawyer said Mr. Harbin donation was given to enable Mr. Johnson to stay actively engaged in the mainstream politics. It was a donation, and its reporting as such is appropriate. Doesn't seem so. Back up here. They added Mr. Harbin had and has no expectation of personal gain whatsoever. Any suggestion otherwise, completely without evidence, militarily or knowingly false. Probably Putin's fault. And I hate when I give someone $1 million for nothing. Someone needs to tell Mr. Harborn what an honest charity is. And if you actually want to help, there's plenty of other ways to give £1 million to rather than some MP. We'll speak more about this. The letter. Mr. Harborn's lawyers did not give substantive answers to questions about why he went on the trip to Ukraine beyond saying appear to have little to no basis in reality. They are possible clues in the leaked files. The itinerary features a closed meeting at the Military Tech R&D Centre. It did not say whether Harborn attended, but it's area he knows well. Well, his position, the largest shareholder in this, with 13%, does not give him a role day-to-day running of the privatised research unit of the UK Armed Forces. His financial stake in its operations is significant. And of course, you hold 13% of this. If you sign a major government contract, you will massively increase your wealth. This company has interest in Ukraine, albeit not its biggest. Ukrainian forces reportedly use the company Banshee drones and bomb disposal robots. Johnson writes, he's both a friend and supporter of my office. He came with me on a trip to Ukraine. I know him to be a passionate opponent of the Putin regime. Also saying this little bit weird here, there's nothing to indicate why anyone might think otherwise, such connections that he's not supportive of the Russian government. Lawyers would not say who the letter was addressed to. Only Dear Sirs was written. Miss Johnson provided a character reference from Mr. Harborn in response to attacks on his character. So what I will say is all of this is as old as time and happens every single day. Those with insider knowledge, those leaving politics, those leaving senior jobs in the military, moving across with knowledge of what's happening, what's needed, and right into policy itself, what weapons or systems may be coming to enrich themselves. And one of the best short books, it's only bloody 30 pages, is War is a Racket, written after the First World War. And let's just look at the opening of this. War is a Racket and always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, and the most vicious. It is the only one in international scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the loss of lives. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. How many of these millionaires shouldered a rifle? And how many of them dug a trench? Let's go a little bit further into the book. Then how do you smash the racket? The only way to smash the racket is to conscript capital and industry and labour before the nation's manhood can be conscripted. It must conscript capital and industry. Now, we're talking about conscription in this, but what it more is hinting to is that these individuals, there needs to be checks and balances for after the war of where have you put money, what decisions have you been made, and also that from MPs to leaders of industry, they should automatically get paid exactly what the troops at the front get paid. The last line here is to get $30 a month, the same wage as the lads in the trenches. And why shouldn't they? Let all these kings and tycoons and masters of business and all those workers in the industry and all their senators, governors and majors pay half of their monthly wage to the families that pay the war risk insurance and Liberty bonds. And why shouldn't they? They're not running the risk of being killed or having their bodies mangled, their minds shattered. They aren't sleeping in muddy trenches. They aren't hungry. The soldiers are. And this is exactly what it talks about, that the way to do this is to make sure that it's no incentive for politicians or leaders of industry for this war, for just war in general to continue. Whether it is at UAC, United Aircraft Company, building Su-34s, through to Rheinmetall building tanks. This war is the best thing that's ever happened for the shareholders of Rheinmetall. Go look at the stock. Same with all these. Where is the real incentive to not have this? And this is where I went over very quickly yesterday, but this idea that is war worth it financially? And the funny thing is, everyone likes to say no. A lot of war doesn't show that. The amount of resources Russia is going to likely take in Ukraine is in the trillions of dollars. The shareholders, these kleptocurrency style politics that happens, all of this too. There's a lot of money being pushed in. There is nothing that makes more money to a few individuals at the cost of many lives like war. Not even the girls shaking their ass on TikTok. Half of which, sadly, are from Ukraine that are apparently bearing the same amount of cost as the boys at the front line. Legends, I hope you have a fantastic day. I'm going to retire to the couch. Look after yourselves. I'll speak to you I'll speak to you soon. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.